There's never been a greater time to be a personal injury attorney. There's never been more people and technologists building great tools for you. And I think the excitement you see from venture in this space stems from the excitement you see from customers adopting and using these tools. We're really energized by how much, I think, compared to a lot of other practice areas, plaintiff attorneys seem to be adopting these new tools. And with it comes we can serve more clients and we can expand access to justice. And I think that is an incredibly healthy outcome for the world.
Welcome to Trial Lawyer View, the podcast dedicated to the fierce yet compassionate lawyers who fight every day for justice in the courtroom. Our guests are top trial lawyers and their firms who share their stories and experiences, offering valuable insights into their journey, as well as expert guests who provide actionable strategies and practical tips for personal injury lawyers looking to optimize their operations, enhance client service, and drive growth in their practices. Trial Lawyer View is brought to you by Synergy. At Synergy, we aren't just a service provider. We are a strategic partner for personal injury law firms, seamlessly integrating with law firms to boost efficiency from day one. Outsourcing cumbersome administrative tasks like lien resolution and Medicare compliance to an expert partner like Synergy enables personal injury firms to focus on what they do best.
Welcome to another episode of Trial Lawyer Review. Today, I'm joined by Viraj Bindra, who is the co-founder and CEO of Finch Legal, a company revolutionizing pre-litigation for personal injury firms by combining experienced case staff with AI agents to streamline administrative tasks. Finch enables plaintiff firms to serve more clients while reducing their workload. Based in New York City, Viraj brings years of experience from his time as an early employee at DoorDash, where he helped build services supporting restaurants, liquor stores, and retailers nationwide. He and his team have focused their attention on blending humanity with technology to a space that always needs a human touch, given the vulnerable population, plaintiff personal injury law. Today, we chat about the rise of technology in the personal injury space, the why behind Finch, and some key insights about fusing technology with outsourced functions for law firms. Viraj, welcome to Trial Lawyer Review. Thank you for being with me today on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Jason. Excited to be here.
So this is kind of timely for me. I saw yesterday a really big announcement about Supio AI, which I don't think is really a direct competitor, but in this exploding technology space for personal injury and law firms in general, which is interesting in and of itself because the profession for a long time seemed to be very backward in terms of technology. But I'm curious about your take on that, or just what's going on right now with the proliferation of tools that are either partly like yours, AI infused with human capital, or just strictly technology solutions for the personal injury space.
I just haven't talked to a ton of attorneys who are kind of going through this change. I think they feel that shift you felt of there's been 10 to 20 years where new tooling changes were few and far between. Like legal research for the first time, like Lexis or Westlaw, was a big Herculean shift. But since then, there hasn't been one. And then AI has kind of precipitated this one. So I think the feeling that I'd walk away with is there's never been a greater time to be a personal injury attorney. There's never been more people and technologists building great tools for you. And I think the excitement you see from venture in this space stems from the excitement you see from customers adopting and using these tools. We're really energized by how much, I think, compared to a lot of other practice areas, plaintiff attorneys seem to be adopting these new tools. And with it comes we can serve more clients and we can expand access to justice. And I think that is an incredibly healthy outcome for the world. That is true. We've actually loved the breadth of other tools in the space. We've had a chance to use them and interact with them and know those teams. And congratulations to Supio on their round. We've seen the same. We've been fortunate enough to have amazing backers. And I think by the time that this launches, we would have announced that we've also raised an extra set of money in our Series A from some of the best investors in the world. And I think the thesis has been, hey, even though things are going well and folks are using this and they're being able to do more and serve more clients, there's still so much room to expand that we're really still scratching the surface of it. And every firm is so different that there doesn't seem to be a one size fits all solution. There's some firms where what they want is a assistant or co-pilot for the work they're already doing. There's others where the leverage comes from tools that do the work for them, or these kind of like service hybrids. Um, and so I actually don't think it's a space where there's going to be, hey, here's the one monolithic solution for every personal injury or plaintiff firm. I think it's one where you're going to continue to see a sprawl that adds a lot of value to different firms that all kind of serve a different purpose and work in different ways.
Well, first, congratulations on the raise. Second, I heard you on Bourbon of Proof, and we talked a little bit about that before we came on, talk about something that really piqued my interest, which is this idea of the need for human touch in personal injury. And I actually know that very well, having been struck by a car. It was 9 years ago on this past Saturday. So I've been through what, a lot of people would consider hell with that. I wound up in the ICU and really significantly altered my life. And that key point about the human touch and the need for that, but fusing it with AI, it really was something that for me was a key to thinking about this technology and how does it really help the personal injury victim, because that is ultimately who we serve, who your end users are serving. So I'm curious about just diving into that a little bit more from your perspective.
Part of when we work with firms, often we're building our own playbook of how to operate on their behalf or with them from their own values and guidelines. And almost every single firm, I would say 100% hit rate for the top value being something that is putting the client first or being incredibly client-centric. So while there's variance in values, that seems to be one that nobody wants to lose the sight of the person in this market in personal injury. And I think particularly if you're tasked with as you went through, helping someone in one of the worst moments of their life with a system they're not familiar with and navigate it, it is a space that I'd be worried about solutions in search of a problem, where those solutions are, let's eke out every bit of efficiency we could out of this. And that leads to outcomes where your first experience with a firm you reach out to when you're in that moment of I'm in the ER and navigating something tough, and I'm talking to a bot, or I'm going through a lengthy kind of form that is getting in my way and clunky, versus I really want someone to tell me what to experience and how to go through this and what I'm going to end up going through and guide me. And that's what counsel is in these moments. And the firms that we've seen be able to navigate this new world well are being very thoughtful about their use of AI or technology, whether it's AI or traditional tech. It is always in service of how do I maximize the client's experience, which it sometimes is cases moving faster or them actually getting more updates from me on how their case is progressing, or it's being able to be served by, I think what I find uniquely the driving force behind Finch is how do more people get served by great counsel as a result of this tech. Today, you have folks who maybe have a case that isn't quite as valuable, quote unquote, as others on a potential attorney's docket, and but it's still meaningful. And that 10,000 that the case is worth is incredibly meaningful to the person who is living paycheck to paycheck and was in an accident of no fault of their own. And does tech actually get to a point where, hey, the cost of helping with that case goes down enough that those cases become worth taking, where otherwise there would be attorneys who wouldn't be able to take those cases on. And so if you're a plaintiff attorney navigating this new world and you believe in the core value of client centricity, I think you should be anchoring on what tech or solutions or process gets to a better outcome for those clients. And what we found is today that world still healthily includes a very adept human touch and empathy throughout intake to my treatment protocol to handling the decision of whether or not to accept a settlement are all like deeply human moments.
Great points. Let's back up a bit. So you went to Stanford, smart guy, I guess. I know I would not have gotten into Stanford, being a Florida State grad, from law school anyway. But I would assume in that kind of environment, you were exposed to some really cutting edge ideas and technologies. How did your experiences there influence your understanding of technology's role in the legal industry, particularly in terms of improving operations and access to justice, if it was even a thought then?
In candor, it wasn't. in candor, there's parts of the journey that make total sense. Of I learned skills that were really useful to me back in college, and there's elements that are I'm kind of a lifelong learner, and I came to the realization of what I'm passionate about and what we wanted to build more recently. So what I'll say is I wish that I'd had a greater focus on law. Back in high school, I did debate, and at this moment where I flirted with the idea of becoming an attorney, or at least going to law school, and at some point I moved schools in high school to a place that didn't offer debate, and I lost my touch of Lincoln Douglas that I was really passionate about, and so I abandoned that train of thought. But a number of friends from Stanford did go to Stanford Law School, and a number of them are actually plaintiff attorneys based in New York. So I have that thread. But in my time at Stanford, I'd say what I other than getting to watch Andrew Luck at the peak of his career, what I got out of that, I learned how systems worked. My major was called symbolic systems, which, as I was explaining to Indian parents, really is like they have no idea what to make of it, but think of as a combination of philosophy, linguistics, computer science, and psychology. And it is largely a major that I would equate to teaches you how to be a thoughtful problem solver and a generalist, and to approach problems and systems with a beginner mindset. And those systems can be systems of language like linguistics, and they can be systems that are how do planes work and what does every single button do, and how do you make sure that a pilot understands how they work. And so I think the alongside how to be a great generalist, that there was this exposure to, especially back in 2011 to 2015, technology that it felt Stanford was a little more on the edge of, and being in Palo Alto and near San Francisco was on the edge of, because so much of the tech coming around at the time, the shift to mobile and kind of social networks evolving in the way they were, was a catalyst for those systems changing. I saw the arc of Uber coming about and being created right as I was wrapping up my kind of junior, senior in college, and was fortunate enough to right out of it be recruited and ended up joining DoorDash, which kind of changed the game for delivery and restaurants and how those operated. And I think it helped for me realize how much technology is a tool that can often change the inputs to how a system has functioned. You make some assumptions on, I'll use the DoorDash example now, but you make some assumptions based on, hey, delivery really only works in really dense cities like New York or Chicago. And that's because only certain restaurants get enough volume of delivery orders because there's enough people near them ordering from them that it makes sense to have a full-time delivery person. And when you have this now like fragmented mobile world where you can have ad hoc tasks assigned to different people who can be moving around in a decentralized delivery fleet, it changes what's possible. And now it's possible for the restaurant that only gets 5 delivery orders to actually deliver those, and for someone to order those in a day. So all that long segue of that lesson coming out of my 2011 to 2015 at Stanford, I think gave me that eye for, hey, whenever there's a new technical shift in the world, there's likely some systems that are going to change. And ideally, if you can have this foresight in the way that Tony did when he founded DoorDash of how those systems might change, and you visualize it like an applied math problem almost of how it would change, then you can kind of be part of leapfrogging and making that change sooner and doing it in a way that's conducive to everyone. So access to justice came about more recently for me as realizing that 77% of American households don't engage counsel when they're in a life big moment that they need it. That number's 92% for low income households. And there are two big barriers. The biggest barrier is access, meaning cost. And the second biggest barrier is going to be awareness. And at least for the first one, feels like one where if you can take a lot of the admin, mundane, trivial work that we know bogs down a lot of procedural, busy work in consumer law, then you can suddenly change that system for the better. And that was kind of the driving force behind Finch.
So that leads you to co-found Finch. You successfully launched it. It's a platform that helps personal injury law firms scale more efficiently. Can you explain about your personal experience and goals outside of your traditional career path that influenced the vision behind Finch? Because you sort of just talked about how you got there, but I'm just wondering, ultimately why this and why now and how?
Yes, but I've got a lot of questions from folks who knew me from DoorDash is how'd you go from food delivery to the legal world? And that feels like a bigger leap. So I'll address the how first, because I think it's more interesting. I think when Tony's talked about how he started DoorDash, so I'll root in my experience over 8 years. And I was fortunate enough to have a front row seat to amazing company building at a company like DoorDash. I was early enough to be one of the first 60 employees there. We were only in maybe a handful of markets across the US, and watching it scale nationally and then internationally was a masterclass in company building. I think one of the ways Tony talked about founding DoorDash was uh, seeing revenue that this like craftsman, which is someone who's running a restaurant, cares most about hospitality. And they started the restaurant because they were driven by creating an amazing experience for their guests and being able to turn that into hopefully a thriving business. But there'd be elements of revenue and running a business that they aren't necessarily experts in, or they didn't have the capacity to fully solve, that led to revenue they were turning away or saying no to. And his instance of this was as he walked into a bunch of restaurants in downtown Palo Alto, a number of them, he watched them get delivery orders over the phone because there was clearly demand for people who weren't able to make it out to a restaurant, either for family dinner or for a bigger catering meal or whatever it would be, to like order in, and then have to say no because it didn't make financial sense for them to have a full-time delivery person. So they weren't staffed or didn't have the capacity to do it. And so the thesis around DoorDash was really started with how do we help them say yes to this revenue, this business owner who's an expert at their craft, say yes to this revenue they're otherwise saying no to. And where I saw a glimmer of that was actually our first customer was a friend of a friend. His name's Ryan Hecht, and he runs his own firm in Austin. And as he started that firm, he had a couple of strengths going for him as kind of a younger attorney. He had more litigation and trial experience than most other folks his age. And two, he had in his time at Austin, as he worked at bigger firms, built enough close relationships with other attorneys who had started their own firms and were thriving that he was actually able to get off the ground with a number of cases referred into him pretty quickly. So I think within his first 2 to 3 months, he had something in the vein of 50 cases that he had the chance to work on and that were referred into him from other attorneys. But he had to start saying no in the same way that I kind of saw those restaurant owners start to say no past 50. And he wasn't bottlenecked on his ability to litigate or his capacity to litigate. He was bottlenecked on, hey, I, for the first time, am trying to figure out how to run a pre-lit operation. And I'm bottlenecked on the amount of medical records I need to be following up with daily, and police reports and the lien tracking and demand writing. And I can't do good by my clients beyond 50, and I can't yet afford help because I haven't settled enough cases and grow my business enough that I can bring on paralegal or assistants to kind of help me grow. So to me, there was this like incredibly bright, hardworking attorney who was capable of litigating great, amazing cases, but was turning away revenue in the same way that I saw not only revenue, but clients that he had the chance to help. And so that honestly was the driving force. And when he walked us through what the work is that he was doing, I had this moment of, hey, parts of this sound like you really need to be doing, or you need to hire someone who needs to be really thoughtful and empathetic doing it. But 60 to 70 to 80% of it sounds like work that 5 years ago humans had to do, and now there's a chance that they don't have to. There's a chance that this is somewhat automatable in the tech that exists today. And so that was the driving force behind Finch. And I think at an end state, if you're willing to take the logical leap with me, it really isn't crazy different from the idea of there's a client or customer if you look at DoorDash, there's a customer who wants the service, which is delivery, and the food, which is the product, at the lowest price and at as conveniently as possible. And there's a restaurateur who's the master of their craft who wants to make that true, but is focused on the hospitality and the food and the experience. And then there was a dasher who we enabled to kind of facilitate the work in between those two. And in this world, there's a lawyer who went to law school and who was trained at being an amazing litigator and wants to spend their time doing that. There is a client who wants their case resolved as well as possible, as quickly and conveniently as possible, and wants to be in the know. And the person doing that work at most firms is this legal assistant or paralegal or case manager. And we really believe that those people are kind of the center point of an amazing pre-lit operation. And what we have largely been doing is kind of amplifying those folks or supercharging them to be able to take on akin to 400 cases rather than the typical 80 to 100. And so serving more clients is a better experience for those attorneys and for clients as well. So again, some logical leaps there, but that's the how we got from DoorDash and food delivery over to consumer law.
Now, in helping law firms scale pre-lit and automate administrative tasks, what's a key insight that you've learned from working with personal injury law firms that you believe all law firm owners should consider when it comes to scaling and growing practice?
I think I'm not the first person, I'm probably the 500th person to say this, but I think the best firm owners have a really good grasp of their metrics. Mike Morse and Fireproof is all dedicated to this, and he does a fantastic job walking folks through it. And I think I'll give you an example of an emotional difference I've noticed. Growth is a very exciting word emotionally. But often as a firm owner, I'm like, I want growth, but I don't exactly know how to drive it. There's like a little more ambiguity in how to achieve it, or there's a bunch of different paths to it. Efficiency, which you kind of is the other word, is a word that sounds nice, but actually doesn't inspire the same emotional excitement. Like solving for efficiency sounds like I'm building documents and processes and SOPs and tables and templates. And I think the best firms find a way to connect very directly efficiency to growth. And what that looks like, for example, is if you get an incredibly streamlined, low cost operation, you likely are taking on more cases per case manager. And if you're able to do that, that's more money that you invest into marketing and growing the firm. Or maybe there's a swath of lower value cases that you're right now saying no to or referring out or aren't able to take on, that if you get that process down efficiently, that efficiency equals the leverage to say yes to those cases, which is incremental revenue. Or if you've gotten that process down to the point where you could almost launch in a new state or geography without having physical people on the ground, that suddenly that efficiency has led to you being able to take on more revenue and serve more clients in a different market. So I think that efficiency sounds like an internal metric that you would like delegate to someone on operations to think about and care about. But I think amazing firm owners will be able to draw that as a direct line, not a dotted line to growth.
Yeah, it's something that we talk about with law firms because when they look at their operations, the amount of time that they spend on what is a purely administrative task, lien resolution, a very necessary one because it protects the net recovery of the client. But yet what their team should be focused on is really accelerating justice for other clients, increasing value of other cases with tasks that do those very things instead of being bogged down in other things. And the thing that you talked about, this idea of running a law firm with a key understanding of your metrics and, what Mike Morse, who's been a guest on the podcast, talks about having a COO running a law firm like a traditional business, which isn't applicable to every firm, clearly, because some firms are just not big enough or they don't have the operational, bandwidth. But the key here is what you're talking about is such an important thing in the evolution, it seems like, of where personal injury practice is going, which is not that it loses its heart, but it's more effective at delivering heart because more people can be served because there's an eye towards it's not just a practice, it's running this in a way that makes sense from a business perspective because that lets you serve more and more.
Yeah, synergy. I think you all have a part of your site talks about allowing trial lawyers to focus on what they do best by handling the other. And I think it's the same thesis we have is if you are delegation is hard. And so I think this is like if you start a firm, you want to be in control of everything. There's this dream of it. And Jason, you've run an organization big enough, and I have too, where you realize at some point you're not going to be able to achieve the scale of what you want to do and your ambition unless you find a way to delegate, and figuring out what drives you and makes you successful and what that you need to own versus what you're comfortable getting help with is, I think, a big inflection point for a lot of folks and firms.
I'm curious, going back to DoorDash, because that experience, I'm sure, has shaped somewhat your approach to scaling Finch. And I'm wondering, specifically in terms of user needs and leveraging technology, how has that shaped what's going on at Finch for you?
This is probably one of the most, like, we've taken a very different approach fundamentally than some of the other tech companies in the space, where I think it's actually, sometimes we get compared a lot more to staffing companies than we do to other tech companies in this generation. And I think part of that is I'll give an example and I'll use it to back into the point, but I think at DoorDash, famously, every single employee had to at least once a month go deliver food themselves. And we we called it We Dash, and it was the most incredible program that unfortunately had to pause during COVID and then restarted again. And when I was working on the Dasher experience team, I was doing it once a week, if not more. And you got this moment of empathy building that was uncommonly true for someone building tech, otherwise isolated in your, behind your computer screen. Of I was interacting with, I was being the dasher. I was interacting with a restaurant when I walk in and understood where they wanted me to stand and where I was getting in the way and how to communicate that I was here and if something was missing from an order. And then I would go deliver and I would understand how to navigate different apartments and buildings. And somebody wanted their food left on the porch, or actually like they were missing an item and I had to go back and retrieve it. So you got this like client or customer interaction as well. And it just forced us to, at high velocity and with deep empathy, build incredible product. And I think I took that away, as DoorDash could have been a company that just kind of builds software behind the scenes that powered other people to do this work. It could have been, here's great tech to help your own delivery drivers do this work, or here's great tech to connect you to people looking for food delivery. Like it could have been that, but that was Grubhub and that existed. And so I think where DoorDash differentiated was it taking on the work, and the way that it did that work of we're actually doing the delivery and facilitating it well at scale was by, one, owning the outcome. At DoorDash, we only believed we were as good as the last delivery we'd done. And so there was this like, we would take the blame for every spilled food and cold food, and rightfully so. This was like a part of the process of us getting better and amazing at this, was us doing the work and getting the reps on our own. And two, just making sure every single employee at the company had deep empathy for the customers we were solving for. Similarly at Finch, I think especially as someone with the hubris of I worked not in the legal field before and now I'm jumping over to build here, I think if we had just built in isolation something that we thought was a great solution for this space and put our software on the internet and sold it, I think there's a high degree of likelihood we would have missed the mark on exactly what's useful. We might have solved the problems that felt easy to solve by technology or that we were excited by, but not the ones that would have solved the most meaningful problems inside of an organization or growing law firm. So the model we landed on, and there's a few reasons why, and I can talk about it, but we employed first, before we added a ton of engineering support or anyone else, we employed amazing, experienced US-based case managers and paralegals. And we learned from the work they'd already done, but we actually just started doing the work into firms. So we start work with firms where we were their either full pre-litigation team or we were case manager assistants for their team. And we used that to figure out where are the bottlenecks and how do we do this work well, and only then decided to automate it. And so even today, every employee here has helped with opening a claim, or has helped follow up on medical records, or has helped take on some intake calls, because we're pulling these 24-hour shifts to make sure that we get coverage all times a day. And I think it's to foster the same sense of empathy of make sure we're solving a real problem. And by us doing the work, we're incurring a little more blame on purpose, right? Like I can't wipe my hands of, hey, we supplied the technology, but it hallucinated and you should have checked the brief or the demand. I have to be responsible for the quality of the work we do. And I think we take that as a very deep commitment to the trust that attorneys instill within us and when they partner with us. But it also means we're getting better every single day, and we're only as good as the last case we helped on.
Well, can you talk about exactly what Finch does for law firms and how that balances the efficiencies of automation with maintaining that human touch that we talked about at the beginning of the podcast? Because I think that's such a unique differentiator for what you have built.
Definitely. I'll put the appropriate caveat of every firm operates slightly differently. Every case is somewhat different. Every state is different. But I will give you an example MVA case in a typical at-fault state and talk about how we might help on it. So again, with the North Star, we're trying to be as human as possible and client forward as possible, but also trying to remove any of the tedium and admin work that otherwise humans are doing. Those examples being the 45 minutes on hold with an insurance adjuster trying to open a claim, or the like daily reminder that I need to go follow up on these medical records, or I have to like refresh the website constantly on BuyCrash to get these like police reports or TCRs. With that goal, example of our process would be if we partner with a firm doing kind of helping them with end-to-end pre-litigation. So this might be for Ryan as a solo practitioner who didn't have another staff of his own. What we might do is we have 24/7 bilingual paralegals and intake specialists who will answer the phone and qualify and sign cases during intake. So this will look like trust and empathy building with someone who's been through a traumatic experience, understand a little bit about their case to know if we are a good fit or not a good fit for them. And that'll be per the law firm's needs based on statute of limitations and what kind of cases they take on and are a fit for. And if so, we'll walk that person through a retainer agreement and get them signed because we know how important the momentum is on that first call where someone needs help actually solving their need and starting work for them. And then do our robust intake beyond that for all the other information we need for case setup. So that's a human doing all of that work. But what AI is doing in the background is listening to each piece of that and extracting datums from that call to kind of think of our CRM as a living and breathing intake form. And we'll send that over to the attorney to end up making a call with green, red, yellow flags on a case that'll help them determine if it's a right fit for them. But assuming they say yes and countersign that retainer, what we're doing right after is kicking off case setup as quickly as we can. And that usually looks like it's all happening within same day, which will be for first and third party, we'll trigger voice AI calls that will call insurance and open claims on their behalf. They have enough information usually from the intake call to be able to supply the information needed to open a claim, get an adjuster name, use that to auto draft letters of representation so that as quickly as possible, you have coverage announced to both parties that you are representing this client. If they went and treated at a hospital already, we'll go immediately request the ER and EMS records. And that'll look like we send a HIPAA individual right of access, kind of with the client's permission, along with a high tech request. And where the magic comes is not actually submitting the request, which there's no magical AI science to, but a lot of the work to actually get those records back in a timely way to keep a case moving is in the follow-up. It's in the gut checking of if a provider's received that, and if so, when they plan to send one back, and then how do we send the deposit or amount, like the check that we'll need to get those records in. And so all of that will happen with kind of these planned voice AI calls that will follow up on those. Or if they use a portal, then we use computer use AI to basically be an agent for automatically going through that portal and requesting and downloading records there. For police report, same deal, where we use that kind of computer agent model to go pull by crash docs, or any other local PD portal. For as soon as those records are available, we internalize them. If they're not on a 5 to 7 day timeline, we'll trigger a voice AI call to the local PD, figure out the way to request that, and then go manually request it. And for each of those steps, as we get information back into our system, as records come back to Finch or as police report comes in by physical mail, we'll digitize all of those and work with a law firm CMS system to make sure that whatever they're using, those updates are put right back into the tool they're already using to track their cases. Last two pieces of this will be during treatment. We'll check in with clients every 2 weeks to make sure they're adhering to treatment. They can flag any gaps in treatment. And so if there's some issue where, hey, I'm not getting better with this treatment that I'm currently seeing, and maybe you need to move over to pain management, we can help them with those kind of moments. And otherwise, ongoingly manage liens and request bills and records in the same automated fashion we talked about before. And when someone hits maximum medical improvement, we'll again use AI to help with the draft of a demand letter, but we will have our very tenured US-based paralegals review that work, gut check for any kind of hallucinations, or make sure that everything's rooted in kind of the original source documentation for someone's case, and then pull in their own verdict analyses. So that what you end up getting as an attorney is something you really feel like there's a human, thoughtful stamp of approval on from someone who's been working with this client every 2 weeks for their duration of their case.
It's interesting because you guys serve in a support function somewhat similar to us, to lawyers, paralegals, case managers. I'm curious, can you talk about the importance of ensuring your services are built for support staff, not just the lawyers themselves? How does your technology and support services help paralegals and case managers become more effective in their roles?
Yeah, which I'll mention, I gave this whole, here's how we do all of pre-lit, or what we see is great. But we partner with firms in two models. And one of them is, hey, if you don't have staff, we can be your full pre-lit team. Or if you're launching in a new state where you want a virtual team, we can be that. But then also as case manager assistants in the other model, where if you have typically at firms, you will have here are the people that are so integral to the business, I want them to stay here forever. Here are the case staff I hired that are more valuable than me, the attorney, for making sure these cases work. And I want to make sure they stick around forever, and that I can help them be able to serve more of my clients, so that as I grow, I can depend on how amazing that person is and the thought and kind of experience they already have with this organization to scale them. And so some of our best relationships with firms, especially ones where we've kind of scaled across the firm, have been because the paralegals and case managers there are internal advocates for us. And what that looks like is Finch isn't this nebulous system that you go work with. You're assigned a person on our end who is very much in lockstep with that person on your end. And so if that's a lead paralegal at a big firm, they'll be working with, say, Michelle, who's kind of our original, our first paralegal hire, who's leading a lot of the pre-litigation team here. Um, and Michelle and them will be on a texting relationship or chatting in Teams or emailing back and forth and unblocking each other. And that human to human interface is part of what lets the technology thrive is, hey, at the end of the day, I feel skeptical of the brand new AI tools that may or may not be taking parts of my job. But like when I'm just getting someone who's here to help me and that person has infinite capacity because they're really good at using those AI tools, that just feels like leverage. And what that should feel like leverage for in the most successful cases is it's leverage for me not to have to be up at midnight to answer this phone call because otherwise we'll lose a potential client because we've got the 24/7 coverage for them. Or the leverage for, hey, it's really hard for me with 100 cases going on at the same time to remember to follow up on every medical record. But every time I forget to do that for a day, then I'm delaying a case. And we have that default built into our back pocket of we're going to follow up every day. And so you, as the paralegal internally in an organization, may be able to focus much more on what feels very high leverage, which is the client interaction. And that's the reason your firm will grow is not because of how necessarily efficiently you handled a case, but how supported that client felt during the experience. And the more touch points they get with your staff and your paralegals, the more likely they are to leave an amazing review, refer their friend or family member who next needs your help. And so I think for the support staff at a firm, this really feels like you got an assistant, whereas otherwise you were the one being dumped work on. You now have an assistant that helps you scale yourself and do the work you think is highest leverage. And I think that realizing that that's part of the model has been a key part of our growth too.
One of the things that we do is try to really integrate into the firms that are using us for more than just, hey, we've got a problematic lien we need help with. Because some firms made the strategic decision, we don't want our staff tied up doing these things. So we try to build ourselves into their processes and help take those tasks off of the law firm. I'm curious with what you guys are doing is what are the learns about the relationship between automation, having outsourced teams, and the law firm's culture itself? Like, how does that all come together to produce a better result?
I think conventionally, especially B2B tech, like when you're selling to firms or to any other business, you largely have the, hey, making the tech more personalized comes with more complexity and takes more ownership and more effort on our end. And so largely there can be a default to a one size fits all for technology of, hey, here's what our software does. We're happy to train your staff on how to use it. And hopefully that is a good fit. I do think the era of AI allows for remarkable personalization. And I think that is because you can take what is a traditional default process and map it to the nuances of how every firm works in a way that you probably couldn't 10 years ago. And so when we work with firms, we're typically not giving them a tool to use. We're first building a playbook, and that either leverages their SOPs or the values they already have. As I mentioned, if they have core values, those become ours. Any paralegal or case manager working on a case on their behalf will see that at the top of their Finch dashboard is going to be the core values of the firm they're representing and working for. It'll be on top of every internal document and guide our work. And as I mentioned, a lot of those are going to be very client-centric values, and we talked about how this will help them do that. But I think that plus this human layer of how we operate leads to, there's a quote from a firm that's just scaling with us now that we piloted with 2 of their teams of attorneys, paralegals, case managers, and is scaling to the rest of the firm. That was what it really impressed or surprised them about Finch is how much it feels like an extension of their team and firm. And that looks like we typically get an email address at the firm. So when we're messaging other parties, whether it be insurance adjusters or whether it be medical practice, we're doing so, if Michelle is the paralegal on it, at michelle@yourlawfirm.com. We'll typically get access to their case management system and we'll operate there. So folks can assign us tasks right in there. We'll be in their Teams chat or Slack chat or invite you to ours So there's those moments where it's just like, oh, I just got this intake, but I'm running into something. Can you guys handle it? You can send those over and we can start working on them. And with each of those, we're developing this playbook that should be very custom to the way you operate. This will be different for there's some firms that would happily take a case that someone has been treating well, even if the accident happened a year ago. There's some firms where you really want to only focus on cases that have been more recent. There's some firms that will take on and handle a med mal case. There's other firms that won't and will look to refer it out. There's firms that have different timelines for when they might write a demand, and some focus on, hey, even if the client's not quite done treating, we think that we're going to have a really strong case by 4 months in and we want to send that out, versus others that want to wait for complete records and bills. And so each playbook we write is truly independent from the other. There'll be some commonality and we'll of course leverage that where we can, but the first step we take with every firm is how do we write down how they already operate and weave into it rather than presenting them with a tool that's a little more one size fits all.
Can you share a specific example of how technology and AI has helped Finch users streamline their pre-lit process? Because I'm curious what that looks like in practical terms.
So I think there's a bunch of obvious ones. Like if you think of and so I'll mention those quickly, but I'll give you a more exciting one. I think the idea of opening a claim feels like largely a formulaic process and this is going to take anywhere from 10 to 45 minutes, depending on the time. And that will be a one-to-one with, hey, we have the same context because we just did the intake call that your staff would have had. And we're able to go use voice AI to open that claim because we know how Progressive's IVR structure works. And when we get through that, we'll be able to have this conversation where we supply the right amount of information to open a claim. So I think any of the time saved from these blocks of time tasks or the context switching between them is really where the leverage comes. Maybe the context switch is the more interesting one is if you typically think about one paralegal and their capacity, they will largely operate sequentially. And that means I will operate on task A. And when I'm done with task A, I now need to actually do some context switching to this other matter, ramp up on it, figure out what tasks I need to do, and then do task B. So even if all of those tasks are 5, 10, 15, 20-minute tasks, it can add up to, I was only able to make meaningful progress on 5 cases today. The example of we'll have a case manager come in who, let's say over the course of the day, had to open 100 claims. That's their task for the day. What they will do at 10 a.m. is they'll actually send out those voice AI calls for all 100. And 80 to 90 of those, because candidly, I'm also not going to promise that voice AI is perfect. Right now, it is largely very good. It gets maybe somewhere between a B plus and an A minus, but it'll have these moments where it can't solve a problem or answer creatively or stumbles. So 80 to 90 of those will come back with a big green check mark of, hey, we successfully opened the claim. Here's the claim number and the adjuster info if we have it. And the other 10 to 20 are what will now go back to the human sequential mode of let me go work through those and manually call the adjusters and open those cases. But suddenly that's a very different world than you have one person who's single threaded with only so much time in the day to execute on those tasks back to back, where 80 of those claims got opened within the same 30-minute period. So that's probably the biggest delta. And I'll give you one, maybe this word agents gets thrown out a lot. And I realize we're in the space where AI is still kind of forming its nomenclature and the definitions are changing a little bit. But an example of a flow that otherwise would be many steps and be harder to execute than it is with us is you often have imperfect information on the ambulance or the EMS service that someone might have engaged with before they got to the hospital. Because generally people don't know the name of the ambulance that came to the scene. They called 911 and someone helped them out. And there's ways of eventually getting that information. It might be in the police report or something else where you can kind of figure that out, or the initial medical records. But one of the systems we'll do to try to get those fast is we will actually look up the potentially EMS services that were within a certain range of or radius of the hospital. And so we'll do this AI assisted web search that lets us find out what those are. And then we'll do voice AI calls to those 5, 6, or 7 and share enough details to figure out if they were the ones who actually were the ones who treated our client. And if so, we will get how do we submit a request and work with them. And then we'll go trigger that flow and then we'll go pay for and get those final requests back. So that's an example of this step function change in how firms might operate, where otherwise you're either delaying and waiting until you have perfect information, or the art of doing that is so burdensome that it's going to take someone a full day to go figure it out. And we can have that kind of running in the background on every new case.
My basic understanding of agents is basically just the ability to execute on a number of steps, bringing together a process that results in an outcome, right?
Correct. And so that's where, in this case, it is that's that lookup. And then from that research, it's the go check which is the right firm or right EMS facility, and then that leads to submit the request and then follow up, and then download, retrieve, and then digitize, and then put in CMS. And so that sequence of actions is where the leverage comes from.
What other things like that do you see for personal injury law firms in a world where AI is able to streamline the pre-lit process?
I think we're working on some of the most like low hanging fruit ones right now. And I think a lot of it is in pre-litigation, and that's where we're at. I'm curious if you think that there's parts of it that affect lien resolution. Like we actually don't touch lien. I actually view us as very complementary to Synergy in a way where we want to do all of the work or help with all the work that leads up to a final demand. And that includes getting a sense of lien balances and what that outstanding record is. But I think that this becomes more important in a world where we just talked about all the humanity and how important that is in part of this process. I also think, though, when you look at hey, how do I serve the client who comes in with, I don't have that much natural medical damages, and my case is probably maybe a 5K case. Like, how do I serve that client? Because I want to serve that client not just for swore an oath that I'm helping humanity, and one day they might have someone who might come to, work with me later. And that may look like someone fills out a form that gets the process started, or you have a shorter intake, then they start doing some work. And then right after they put that information in about their case and where they treated and what happened, you can go trigger those automations that happen immediately after. And I think this like world of kind of different tiers of service that scale to the needs of a client and what they are in, I think that is where you might see this evolution of, if we had discrete information on exactly where someone treated, then actually automating the rest of the process of getting their medical records in and having them review it themselves and start to generate a medical chronology immediately and lead to a demand letter at the end of the day. Like that work starts to happen a lot more automatically. So Ken, I think a lot of the leverage will still be in the pre-litigation process, or where you all are in kind of the like resolution and disbursements process is where I think you'll see most of the automation, rather than in litigation, which is where we see a lot more nuance that feels less structured.
Even generous with your time. A couple more questions. I wanted to ask you, are there some ways that firms are using you guys that you didn't expect in your technology?
The one that I was very surprised by, but it's come up now where we're helping on the order of 10 firms expand to new regions and states. And I think that they'll have attorneys that are licensed. So they've always operated in one place. And I think pre-COVID, there was an attachment to, I should largely have a large physical presence where I operate. And we saw during COVID the loosening of that, and a lot of firms start to work in different parts of the state, even if they didn't have a physical office there. What we're working with some firms to do is launch in a model where, let's say they have tremendous brand recognition and a great name and have supported many clients in their home state. They might launch in a neighboring state and run some advertising under their name and brand. If those cases come in and we've learned their playbook internally already, we can kind of scale that model with excellent US-based staff in that new state that understand how that state operates and see that case from intake through demand. If it resolves in pre-litigation, then it's an excellent outcome for that firm. If not, they can either choose to engage with that case in litigation, or they might find amazing co-counsel that's more apt for that case in that state. That has helped a lot of firms think about diversifying their practice and being able to, one, serve more clients, but two, especially in some markets where there's like concerns around tort reform, how do I like de-risk my business? It's by operating in a bunch of other states. And so we've seen some firms take it on with that lens as well.
So last question, we talked all about all these great things that technology can do. What are some of the key limitations of AI and technology today as it relates to the personal injury world?
I think the shortcomings may not be shortcomings forever. So I think this is one where like every month or two, it's worth checking where the tech is, because it's candidly gotten a lot better in a short period of time than I think a lot of people expected. But today, we have found your conversion rates for clients on an intake call will be worse if you are using voice AI for that or some form of AI. We talked about the value of humanity. I think today you will not be able to scale with the same kind of metrics and quality you want with pure voice AI and talking to clients. I think second, without human review on some of those like outputs and artifacts that matter, I think you can lead yourself to some messy situations. And so we're not yet at a like hallucination-free AI future. And regardless of the tool you use, you'll see some amount of that. And so still having a human review on anything, a demand letter that goes out, verdict analyses, case law, those kind of things are still critically important. Maybe last I'll mention is I think you're increasingly seeing a number of clients or customers who would have tried to solve some of these problems themselves. I think there's an appetite for, hey, I know how to use ChatGPT. It's helping me ask dumb questions and go solve some questions. I didn't know how to do X before, and now I can look up Y. And so I just think the only takeaway there for a firm owner is you have clients who actually want to participate in their case and move it along and in the process, and who might have done their own research to try to understand. And so as much as you can use AI as a tool to demystify for them, that's great, but it's not yet a tool that can autonomously help someone all the way through the nuances of their case. There's a ton of expertise that comes from working with attorneys who have done this before, or have seen these type of cases, or understand how the nuances of their market and adjusters work, that is worth. And I think it can't replace the fact that the most important aspect to a demand letter is not the way you phrased any particular part of it. It is the letterhead on the top of that demand. And it is the track record that that attorney or firm has of litigation and trial that actually guarantees getting you the best outcome you could get and what you're due from an insurance company. So I'll touch on this.
That last point's important. I mean, because having been through that, and I was very different because I was so participatory in my case, being a lawyer, doing what I do, and even at mediation, talking directly to the adjuster about my damages, because my lawyer felt like, hey, what better way to show the adjuster that this is a case you don't want to take to a jury by having me talk about what this meant for me in my life. But there's some, not that AI, maybe at some point AI can have that heart, but that's where we talked about that human touch and what lawyers can bring to the process and resolution of personal injury cases. There's just some things that technology today probably never, I don't know, I guess we'll see, we'll be able to replace. So great way to end, because ultimately, the listeners today, this is what they do. They help people every day by going to court and ultimately doing what needs to be done to get compensation, because it's the only way we have to deal with these sorts of situations, unfortunately.
Agreed. And again, thank you for having me on, Jason. It was an extremely fun and nuanced discussion. And thank you for having me on.
Well, if anybody wants to learn more about Finch, what's the best way to find out about what you guys do?
finchlegal.com is our website. We also own prelit.com. So either one of those, and learn a little more about us. But feel free to shoot me if this sounds at all interesting, or not even that Finch is a fit, but you're exploring AI solutions out there and just want some advice on how to think about the landscape. Happy to help there. We work with a ton of firms that haven't used our services, but we've helped direct to something that they find useful. So for anyone listening, if you want to shoot me an email, it'd be at viraj@finchlegal.com, and would be excited to just talk about your practice and what might be useful there.
Generous offer, and a great conversation today about what is an incredibly timely topic, the proliferation of technology in the personal injury space. And thanks again for your time, and we'll see everybody on the next episode of Trial Lawyer View.
Here is another episode of Trial Lawyer View. We hope you enjoy today's guest and discussion. Tune in to our next episode for more helpful insights from fellow trial lawyers and practice experts. This podcast is brought to you by Synergy. Visit partnerwithsynergy.com to learn more about how Synergy can free your firm to focus on what it does best.